listening to Evidence for Faith. This is the Christian Evidences and Worldview radio program that helps Christians become thinkers and thinkers become Christians. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Mike Larakis.
And I am Keith Kendricks.
Keith, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Good to see you. I'm sorry about the recent passing of your mom.
Yeah, that was sad. It was expected, though. So, and she was spiritually prepared. So, I'll be going off late this week to go to the funeral and things. But all in all, I guess it's as good as something like this can go.
Well, give your brothers and sisters hugs from me and my wife.
Will do.
Today, Keith, we do have a great show. I'm actually very excited about this. And today we're going to be talking about how absurd would life be if God didn't exist? How absurd would that be?
Right.
And this is something that's been looked at over the ages, really starting with the Enlightenment, which I find very peculiar to call the Enlightenment of the 1700s, starting with Voltaire and others, who basically tried to kill God.
Right.
With rational reasoning, thought, and writings, and so forth.
And it turned out to produce an absurd lifestyle, an absurd way of living.
When you look at the fruits of their writing and the societal changes that have happened not only in Europe, but now the United States with the postmodernist era, you can, turn on the evening news at night and you see what happens in the face of no morality and no godly influences on people growing up.
Right. Well, before we get into that, though, I have an email question. So somebody sent us an email question. I didn't tell you about this because I wanted to get your unprepared remarks.
Go ahead.
See this.
Let's try it.
All right. The question says, let's see, do you accept the historical development, parenthesis, over 400 years, of the current Bible, New Testament at least, and the, quote, historical development of Christianity with many sects rising and falling in the first 500 years?
Okay, bounce that off me one more time.
Do you accept the historical development over 400 years of the current Bible and the historical development of Christianity with many sects rising and falling during the first 500 years?
Well, I find the term the current Bible peculiar.
Yeah.
Because there is one writing, the original documents, that can be traced back to 20 to 50 years after Christ actually walked the planet. Of course, that would be the New Testament writings. So I'm not sure what the current Bible means unless they're alluding to the King James Version and other versions that we now have, like the NIV or the New American Standard, and the list goes on and on.
No, I think they're talking more about the things like the Gospel of Thomas and other Gnostic writings that are not accepted as canonical.
Okay.
And so this is often thrown up at people as an excuse for, look, you can't trust the Bible. It's just one of many things, and some church authorities 400 years later decided that this is our Bible, and they left out the parts that they just personally didn't like. So I think that's what this is alluding to.
Okay.
So it's a knock at Christianity because, you guys are just the surviving cult, the surviving branch of Christianity. There was, in early Christianity, there were all these divided points of view, and it's perfectly reasonable to go back to one of those things. So, we've covered this in past shows with how the New Testament developed, and, this is really a mistaken view. Gnosticism didn't come along until Christianity was already very successful, and in order to compete with Christianity, they started trying to match it and develop their own gospels so that they could keep their adherents from transitioning over and becoming Christians.
Okay. I would like to remind everyone that you can actually access previous files of shows that we've done, specifically the canon, by going to evidenceforfaith.com. That's evidence for the number 4 faith.com. And if you scroll through the index, you'll see the show on New Testament canon. And what Keith and I are alluding to is everything that what makes up today's canon and what's accepted by the authorities on the early church documents as to what withstood the test of time,
Right.
and also the veracity of the writings and how they integrate as a whole.
And you can also find our speaking engagements. And I currently have a speaking engagement on Wednesday nights. So if you'd like to come out to Bible or Victory Bible Church in Hamilton, it's at 816 South Egg Harbor Road, Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. It's a time of prayer and then a lesson after the prayer. And right now we're going over the evidences that God exists, and we just finished the fine-tuning of the universe last Wednesday, and we're going to be going over intelligent design this Wednesday. So if you'd be interested in learning about intelligent design, come on out this Wednesday at 7 p.m. to Victory Bible Church in Hamilton.
To our listening audience, I would like to remind you that this is an interactive program. You can call us at 609-398-1020 as we explore today's topic, the absurdity of life without God. So if you are either an agnostic, if you're searching, if you're a bona fide atheist, this is a show that's going to explore the question, what is it about life with God versus life without God, and the worldview that you develop and the lifestyle that you live? We're going to be exploring all of that. So write that number down, 398-1020.
And I've got just one last personal thing. I had a wonderful time last night. I met a very interesting person. There's used to be, at least I used to listen to it all the time, a radio program, a pastor from the Presbyterian Church at Wayne, Pennsylvania, by the name of John Galloway Jr. And when the alarm would go off, it would come on to the station, and I'd always listen to him in the morning. I found him fascinating, and used to listen to his preaching every Sunday morning when I was waking up and getting ready for church myself. I got to sit next to him last night.
Did you get his autograph?
I wanted to, really. I mean, I just told him, I was like, oh, this is so cool. Oh, just talk some more. I like hearing your voice, things like that. It was great. So I was at the 153rd Academy of Music Ball, and he just was placed at our table. So it was one of those God things. So I said, ooh, now I do a radio show. So he's retired now, and it was fun sitting next to him. And we got to listen to the concert before the ball was a Sting, backed up by the Philadelphia Orchestra. So 100 pieces of orchestra behind Sting. It was pretty good. He played all his hits. So
I'm sorry that my wife and I missed that. We usually go with you to
I know.
gala event, and of course it's
next year.
It is a fundraiser for the Philadelphia Orchestra, and it's a white tie affair. Very nice. Dinner is included for the price of admission, and we do plan on being there next year.
Well, let's get started with the absurdity of atheism. You can argue that atheism itself is irrational because it says, I know God doesn't exist, right? Well, saying I know God doesn't exist is a universal negative. So right there, that is an irrational statement. It's irrational to posit something that you could never know, because you can never know whether a universal negative is true or not. So right there, you've got a problem. But what we want to look at today is the problem that comes from trying to make this your lifestyle, trying to use atheism as a way to build a life. And there's a quote from anthropologist Lauren Isley, where he says, man is the only creature to ask why to questions regarding his existence. And that really is true. We do ask that question. We do want to know how we got here.
Who am I?
Yeah.
Why am I here?
Right.
What's
What
the
purpose do I have in life?
Sure.
Right.
Sure. These are major philosophical questions that have teased man since he had a rational thought process.
Right.
And the odd thing, and we already brought this up at the introduction to the show, is that a lot of this belief in God was actually attacked by the writers of the Enlightenment.
Right.
Starting with the French, really around the time of the French Revolution, with Voltaire and Rousseau and so forth, all of the philosophers since them who have attacked God. And I really feel that the attack was brought on because of the inherent corruption of the theocracy of the day, and how the church was so totally tied to the political system, especially in France, and everybody realized how corrupt the whole monarchy was and how corrupt the church was, and the power and the money and the struggle there. So once the French Revolution happened, and of course the Enlightenment was already underway, it only stood to reason that they would attack God because the entire system was corrupt.
Right. Yep. And their ideas, their concepts developed and showed that, man really is a byproduct of nature. If there's no supernatural, you only have nature.
Right.
So man is just a product of the stuff in the universe, mass, energy. That's all we are.
It's really interesting, Keith. If you look at the timeline from the Enlightenment on late 1700s, you fast forward about 70 years, you come to Charles Darwin in 1859 on the origin of the species, and this only solidified their stance that man was an accidental byproduct of nature, of matter plus time and chance.
Right.
The chance factor had to be thrown in there. So it was nature plus time plus chance. That makes us an accidental byproduct. This glorious human body with the capacity to rationally think and write and read and teach now became a function of chance.
Yep. So this answer to our existence really turns out to be a very dark and terrible thing, very disturbing. So instead, the Enlightenment thinkers, I think, thought that they were going to somehow free themselves from God. They were going to free themselves from the control of the church and other things. But they wound up being orphaned instead. Without God, now you're just an orphan. And you have this really awful view of your existence, that you're just nothing but an accident.
Wow. It's sad. And basically, here you are, man alone in the universe, doomed to die.
Yeah.
Because they knew that the universe was going to be this dark, gloomy thing where all the stars would eventually burn out. The earth would burn up or disappear or totally go bye-bye with climate change. And everybody was doomed to die. And every star was doomed to die. And the universe was getting darker and colder with each of these passing mini-deaths.
Yeah. There's an existentialist by the name of Paul Tillich who says that, mankind has got to come face to face with the threat of non-being, the fact that we're just going to be extinct. Not only each individual person, but the entire human race. Eventually, everything in the universe, we're all going to be nothing. We're all going to be dead. And, this can be, for some people, very staggering, very overwhelming thought that there is going to be nothing of me left over, nothing of the human race, nothing of the universe left over.
Yeah, another existentialist, Jean-Paul Sartre, said that when you're looking at the timeline of eternity, okay, it doesn't matter whether or not you have any foundational belief in God, whether you're several hours from that or many, many years without God. It really doesn't matter, because during that timeline, this march to eternity, the universe continues to march despite what you think and what you feel and what you do to this grave. So it's irretrievably marching towards this grave. So eternity really doesn't matter. But what's interesting, Keith? He's actually talking about entropy here.
Right.
The second law of thermodynamics, this inexorable march to nothingness or grave, the grave, just things winding down. But there's no escape and there's no hope from this mind process, this philosophical viewpoint.
Well, if you're just joining us, you are listening to Evidence for Faith, and we are talking about the consequences of atheism. One thing is that life itself just becomes ultimately absurd, because since everything is going to die, everything came from an accident and it's all going to die, there is no ultimate meaning in life. There's also no ultimate value in life and no ultimate purpose in life.
And if you agree with this, you can give us a call. Remember, this is an interactive show. You can call us at 398-1020 and share your thoughts. But anyway, so what's the big deal? If we have no ultimate meaning without the immortality and God, what does it all mean?
Right.
What happens? What happens to society? What happens to individuals?
Well, we have a caller, so let's see what this person's got to say. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
I heard you talking about the atheism, and I used to be an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt exactly what you're talking about, like those two philosophers, that it was totally pointless, and what was the point of life? And it's not a fun way to live.
So now you're a Christian now?
Yes. Actually, I had a friend who was a Christian, and she didn't know that I was feeling this way, and she wasn't like trying to convince me to be a Christian. She just was living her life as a Christian, and I saw how she was living her life, and that, you know, she had meaning and purpose, and she was trying to be a good person, and you know, I just wanted that because I knew deep, like nobody around me would know that I was like depressed, or I wasn't like this person that couldn't get out of bed in the morning because I was an atheist.
Mm.
But it was like underneath, you know, I lived my life, but underneath, I just was like, what's the point? There's no point here. And just seeing her living her life and the difference was enough to convince me that I didn't want to live the way I was living.
Hmm.
Wonderful, very powerful.
Yeah.
And how many years ago was that?
1983. No, 1982.
Okay,
1982.
and since that time, what have you found as far as your meaning, the meaning of life, and so forth?
Well, once I just called out to God and asked Him to come into my life, He became the meaning of my life. I mean, that's why I live now, for Him, and to tell other people about Him, because I don't want other people who are in this same situation to feel the way I felt.
Mm.
And, you know, not only that, once you become a Christian and you believe in Jesus and you believe that you're going to live eternally with Him, and you believe that if you don't believe in Him, you're going to be in hell. You know, you don't want people to have that. So it turned my whole life around.
So you basically went from darkness into light.
Yes.
That's interesting, because that's exactly what the Enlightenment was trying to undo, and they called it the Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm. And it brought darkness.
Yep.
Thank you very much, caller. That was
Thank
wonderful.
And you know what I find very interesting, Keith? If you
Mm.
look at John chapter 3, where Jesus was given up by God as the only begotten Son
Mm-hmm.
for the world. And if you look at John, that's of course John 3:16. If you look at John 3:17, Jesus didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. Okay?
Absolutely.
But men loved darkness. If you keep reading to the conclusion of that chapter,
Uh-huh.
it's all about light and dark. Men love darkness. Consequently, they didn't want to come into the light. Consequently, they didn't believe in the only begotten Son.
Right.
And consequently, they were condemned already.
Right.
It's there, folks. Just read chapter 3 in John chapter 3 in the Bible.
All right, so there's no ultimate meaning without God. If each individual, like we said, is going to die, he's going to pass out of existence, there's no soul, there's nothing left. Really, what ultimate meaning is there to that person's life? Does it really matter that that person lived at all? You know, these are all questions that atheists have to ask. Well, they think we have to ask it of ourselves too, that there's no meaning to life at all.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if they lived well or if they lived poorly. And I don't mean materialistically. I'm talking about morally. Did they live well? Did they run a good race? It doesn't really matter ultimately.
Right. That's right.
Without God, it doesn't matter.
So if all events are meaningless, then what's the ultimate meaning of any of it, right? You can say, well, there's relative meaning by what I particularly do. You know, I do my job. I'm a police officer, and so I do my job the best I can, and that gives me meaning. But if it's all going to disappear at the end of the universe, then it ultimately it has no meaning. It might have a kind of a sort of meaning for you today, but it's not. It doesn't have any ultimate significance.
Let me take your police officer one step further, Keith. He's doing a great job, and he's a public servant.
Mm-hmm.
But then something tragic happens in that, let's say he's in the line of fire and he allows his life to be taken, let's say because he blocks a bullet from hitting an innocent bystander.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what difference would it make anyway?
Right, that bystander's going to die anyways.
Yeah, so
right.
What difference would it make for him to do something so gracious and honorable?
Uh-huh.
It wouldn't matter.
Yeah,
in the long run.
Here's another way of thinking about it. What if the Big Bang never happened? What if the universe never started at all? Okay, well, if we're all doomed to die anyways, what difference would it make? It would be the same thing. It's just as if there was no universe, no Big Bang, no universe, no accidental people on Earth.
And that we never existed at all in the first place.
Exactly, the same end result.
So the logical conclusion of this philosophy or this mindset or this enlightenment is gloomy. It's dark.
Right. Yeah, mankind is a doomed race on a dying universe. We're going to cease to exist, and ultimately mankind makes no difference to the universe. What does the universe care about mankind? Mankind is like some kind of accidental parasite.
Right.
It's
interesting because if you're a thinker and you carry this whole argument that God doesn't exist anyway. I am a confirmed atheist, and I'm just into my job, and I'm into this intellectualism,
mm-hmm.
but you can't help but to go through this logical conclusion and the horror that really confronts modern man, because he ends up in nothing, and he ultimately is nothing, and it's not just because of this lack of immortality.
Okay.
It's a function of it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. You could say, oh, well, maybe immortality, maybe living forever, maybe it's because we're going to die that we don't have meaning, but that's not really true. There's William Lane Craig tells a story about an astronaut who gets trapped on an asteroid, and he realized he's stuck there and no one's ever going to come and rescue him or find him. So now he happens to have 2 vials with him. He has one vial which will give him immortality, and he'll never die. The other vial is poison. Now, he's stuck with the dilemma, what should he do? No one's ever going to find him. He's stuck on an asteroid. He can never do anything. He elects to take the poison. So he drinks the poison, just get it over with. And to his horror, he realizes that he drank the wrong vial.
And that he's going to live forever on this asteroid.
Yeah. And he is
horrified.
Right. So it's not the mere fact that we're going to die that makes life meaningless in the atheistic worldview. It's that there's no God.
And without God, there's lack of meaning.
Right.
There are a couple of really good literary examples too, Keith. If you want to, we can explore some of them.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. And basically, this is a play of 2 people on a stage who carry on this rather meaningless and insignificant dialogue for 2 hours while they're waiting for this third party, Godot, to arrive.
Right.
And Godot never arrives.
Uh-huh.
And so the curtain drops, and you're left looking at each other, whoever you went with, saying, what the heck was that all about? And basically, it's a microcosm of your existence, just passing time away with no end in sight and really no relative meaning to any of it.
Right.
And
and just Godot is a play on words for God.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And God never comes because God doesn't exist. Yep. So also other literary things have dealt with this. You've got Sartre's No Exit, Albert Camus' The Stranger, Jacques Monnet's Chance and Necessity. Many, many people have dealt with this issue that if there is no God, then it's really true. There is no ultimate meaning in life.
Right.
So a very sad thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure that many of you remember Albert Camus' L'Étranger. That's the French writer for The Stranger. He basically documents this life of an individual who has absolutely no meaning, and at the end of his life ends not with a bang, but with a whimper.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the texts that we all required, at least when I was in high school, to read, and we had to read it in French class.
Wow.
So,
well, it's not just that there's no meaning in life, but there's also no ultimate value in life without God. If everything ends at the grave, then ultimately it also makes no difference how one lives. So it's not just that there's no meaning to your life, but it makes no difference how one lives. You know, our destiny is unrelated to our behavior. No matter how you behave, you're going to wind up with the same destiny. So why not live as you please? This is an obvious conclusion of atheism.
You know, it's interesting, live as you please. It reminds me of the old beer commercial, go for the gusto, because you only go around once in this life.
Yep.
Go for the gusto. So the problem that we have is that without God, there's no objective standard for right and wrong, or for living well or for living poorly, because in the end, there's no judgment. You can do whatever you please. If it feels good, do it. That was the battle cry of the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Sartre talked about the moral values were either a byproduct of personal taste or a socio-biological evolutionary byproduct.
Right.
So
that's all that morality is.
Correct. So the moral relativism was born there. You know, what's good for you is good for you. What's good for me is good for me.
Right.
So what's true for you is true for you, and so forth. And consequently, you have there's no right and wrong. It's just all gray areas.
Now, many atheists do try to say that they can have moral values without God. In fact, I remember walking down the streets of New York City with a affirmed Muslim and discussing. I was looking for a common area to discuss, and one of the things that we have in common with Muslims is the belief in God, and that this is what gives us our basis for morality. And so we were just discussing how in atheism there is no basis for morality. And we were, it's a crowded New York street. It was the time when people are letting out from restaurants and going to the theater. And this woman who was walking along in front of us turned around and said, "That's not true," to the statement that without God, there is no such thing as moral values. Well, of course, you have to believe something like that. You have to just tell yourself that there is a way of having moral values when there's no God, because people can't live that way. People can't live as sociopaths, basically. That's the ultimate result of atheism, because in reality, since there's no meaning to life and there's no lawgiver, there's no one to make the standards of right and wrong, then really there is no basis of right and wrong. And that just, it rubs people the wrong way. So they try to live as an atheist and still borrow the moral values from other, cultures like the Christian culture.
Yeah, so it's very interesting because God is the ultimate lawgiver, and he is the total basis and standard for what is right and wrong, starting with the original 10 Commandments,
Mm-hmm.
So, ultimately, if there is no difference between right and wrong, and it's all gray areas in this moral relativistic mindset,
Mm-hmm.
What difference is there between a Hitler, let's say, and the Mother Teresa in their lives? And ultimately, what will it mean when they're dead?
Right. Yeah, to say that something is wrong because it's forbidden by a law-giving God, that is perfectly understandable. That makes sense. But to say that something is wrong without having a God who forbids it is not really understandable. I mean, to who do you have the obligation to do something right? If there's no God there's no lawgiver, you don't have any obligation. So the concept of moral obligation is really unintelligible without God.
And if you want to take this argument one step further, Keith, here's a tough one for them to grapple with. The moral relativists, because of their mindset, they would have a difficult time condemning war. They'd have a difficult time condemning oppression, calling crimes as evil, or on the opposite side of that spectrum, praising love or praising brotherhood, or talking about equality as a good thing.
There is no real way to improve. There's Luther and Gandhi. They're, in a sense, they're automatically wrong because they're standing up against, say, the culture. So let's say you get your moral values from the culture. Okay, well, Luther and Gandhi stood up against their cultures. So what does that make them? It makes them wrong. So the without God, there really is only personal or culturally relative, subjective judgments. Those are the only kinds of judgments that are possible. So there's no meaning, no value, but there's also no purpose without God. Without God, there's really no goal, no purpose for which the universe exists. So there's man's kind of lost in this indifferent, oblivious universe without any kind of purpose.
Right. So in this universe without God, there's clearly no hope. There's no purpose. And if this is true of the universe, then it has to be true of men individually who embrace this mindset.
That's right. Because without God, man is simply like a freak of nature, or just, this product of blind chance, time, matter, over a long period of time. It's just an accident.
Right.
That's all that any person is.
It's almost like a miscarriage. It was an accident.
Right.
It was created and then aborted, and boom, you got a miscarriage.
Now,
so here man is having to try to explain his behavior in a variety of ways. Right. And so this comes down to the fathers of psychology and sociology.
Yeah. What did the atheists say about right and wrong? Yeah, they said, for instance, psychology, Freud.
Oh yeah. Your behavior is a function of repressed sexual tendencies.
Right.
Of course, that's the whole basis of Freudian psychology. And if you look at the sociological arguments of the big shots, Skinner and Russell and so forth, they say that all choices are determined by conditioning. Okay, freedom is just an illusion. Yeah, and or biological man, and I love this quote, and this is from Francis Crick, one of the co-discoverers of DNA in 1954. He's one of the guys that discovered that it was a double helix, and consequently modern genetics was born in 1954 coming forward. But he said this: man is an electrochemical machine that you can alter by altering, or you can control it by altering the genetic code. So we now clearly have models in the laboratory whereby man can alter the genetic code and hopefully cure some of the genetic diseases that plague the human race, or in an evolutionary concept, time and the environment alter the genetic code. But we know that it's a little bit more complex than that.
Yep.
And I've always said that DNA is the thumbprint of God.
So there are these various ways of trying to explain behavior, but none of them result in any ultimate purpose. So if you're just joining us, you are listening to Evidence for Faith. I'm Keith Kendricks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Larakis.
And if you'd like to join in the conversation, challenge us maybe, you can call in at 609-398-1020. And remember to check us out on evidenceforfaith.com. Well, we have to consider the gravity then of the alternatives that face the atheist. Without God, there is, without God, there's no hope for man. With God, there is. Without God, there's only despair. Majority of the people really don't understand the implications. They continue on without really fully thinking through these considerations. They accept atheism because maybe it's personally convenient to them.
Yeah, there's no conviction, there's no condemnation, and consequently they just go through their lives like hamsters on a wheel. And the problem is that Nietzsche even predicted that ultimately people would realize the implications of their atheism and the convenience that it offers them in the day-to-day living without conviction or guilt or shame. But ultimately, the realization that there's life without meaning is going to be this big bombshell that finally explodes in their brain. Pretty much the same as the caller that we had on earlier in the show.
Right.
She found no ultimate purpose. She was living in darkness and despair, and came to a realization that her friend was leading her in the right direction because she was living a life filled with hope and meaning.
Yep. And Nietzsche tells a story that kind of describes this. He calls it the madman, the story of the madman who lights a lantern in the middle of the day and comes out to a crowd of typical atheistic people, and he says he's looking for God. And then they start teasing him, where maybe God has gone away on a journey, and on and on. And he expounds this madman then starts saying, you don't realize how serious this is. I'll tell you where God is. God is dead, and we've murdered him, meaning, that culturally we've adopted atheism and essentially murdered God. And you don't understand that this is like unleashing the earth from its orbit around the sun. We're just headed to ultimate doom and destruction. And no one seems to understand what this madman is talking about. And so he smashes his lantern to the ground and he says, I've come too soon. These people just don't understand what's going on. But he predicted that one day that there would be this nihilistic worldview, and which basically nihilism is the belief in nothing. No God, no morals, and that it would result in an incredibly destructive way of living. And what happened? The 20th century was the bloodiest century in human history. More people murdered by atheistic regimes than had ever died in the history of the earth for, say, religious wars or some kind of competing philosophy. One calculation that I saw was in the 20th century, 170 million people were slaughtered by only 52 atheists.
And these would include the people like Hitler,
Stalin,
Pol Pot,
yep,
and so forth.
Mao,
yep,
on and on. Well, just count 52 of them.
So when you look at the world in a nihilistic mindset, you have the destruction of all meaning and value in life. And, even if you look on the home front, just watch the 6 o'clock news, and you can see what's going on. Who shot who robbed this, who raped that, and who burned down so-and-so's business. It's, the ingredients are always the same.
So the atheist has to ask himself this question that Nietzsche's madman asked: how then can we comfort ourselves? Right? There are only the only solution for atheists is to face the absurdity of life bravely. Kind of face it and kind of live valiantly anyway. This is something that Bertrand Russell discussed, the philosopher Bertrand Russell. His solution was, you just have to come to terms with life, realizing that the world is a terrible place, and face it and live life anyways. Now, It turns out Bertrand Russell was really a terrible person. He believed that the world was a terrible place. He was personally a terrible person. One of the things he did is he was staying at his best friend's house, and he seduced his best friend's underage daughter. Why not? Right? He's an atheist. There are no rules. There are no morals. Life is a terrible place. Just live it. And that was his viewpoint.
Well, Keith, you said that Bertrand Russell was a terrible individual, but who are you to judge?
Yeah, that's right. In atheism, there's no morals to judge by. He was just doing whatever he wanted to. He was fulfilling his right?
Self-actualization.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of the comments that you'll get in anybody who's part of this mindset, they throw at you immediately, who are you to judge? Well, I am an individual who's 54 years old, and I've been around the block a few times. I know what's good and what's not.
Right. You're a morally discerning agent. You ought to be able to judge.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the whole problem that we have in today's society is this whole concept of oughtness. What ought we do?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll argue things that really have no real moral basis, and they're in a dilemma. We know what we ought to do. You should do the right thing. Well, who are you to judge? And it's this whole battle that goes on and on and on.
Yep.
Albert Camus came to the conclusion that you had to honestly recognize life's absurdity and then try to live out your life in love.
Yeah, which does not make any sense in his view, right?
Well,
where does he get the idea that love is morally valuable?
Well, I think Bertrand Russell had the idea.
Yeah, it's a sexual love, right?
Exactly.
So this is the problem of atheism, that it's impossible to live consistently and happily within this framework of this worldview. You can have either or. Either you can live consistently with atheism and be unhappy, or you can live happily but inconsistent, not according to the dictates of atheism.
Right. So it's an either or, but not a both
Right.
type of a situation. The interesting model, Keith, that we can use to sort of define this whole concept is Schaeffer's model of this two-story universe, or let's call it a two-story house, just for conceptual reasons.
And Francis Schaeffer, I recommend him to anybody out there. Terrific reading.
Yeah.
Fabulous guy, philosopher who died a couple decades ago.
Yeah. So anyway, looking at Schaeffer's model of this two-story universe or this two-story house, the upper story had meaning and value and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
In life, you would always take the high road so that you had meaningful insights, that you had value-added services and everything else that would make it a good and proper way to live,
Right.
and that you purposed to live a moral and good life, and hence it gave itself meaning all the way through. The lower story, on the other hand, was this life without God, in a finite world, this absurd life that happened by chance, life without meaning, purpose, direction, etc. You're just basically a hamster on a wheel, going through life and doing what you had to do to survive. Well, if you look at the modern man concept that we're talking about, this enlightened model that was promoted by the Enlightenment,
Right.
without God, you have modern man living in this lower story home or this lower story two-tiered universe without any belief in God. But you know what? He can't stay there consistently and happily,
Right.
because he realizes the absurdity of it all. And consequently, he makes leaps of faith into the upper level
Right.
of this home or this universe, to affirm that life does have some meaning or some value or some purpose. But you know what? He has no right to go there, because without God and without the value systems and the right and wrong that are imparted by a God of the universe, he has really no privilege to be there. He's an uninvited guest.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that's the criteria that atheists have. They're stuck.
Yes.
They're stuck on this first level that you're talking about, or this first story.
Right.
They
without
then
God.
so they have to make a leap of faith that they criticize so much in other people having faith. They're forced to do that if they want to have some kind of meaning in their life.
But you know what? I said that they're an uninvited guest. In the Christian model, they are invited. Come as you are. Come as you are, as soiled and dirty and hopeless wreck that you are. Come in.
And you don't have to make a blind leap of faith, because there is real meaning and real purpose in the universe, because God does exist.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the arguments against atheism. And the first is this whole idea that without God, life really does have no ultimate meaning, and yet the atheistic philosophers continue on as though it did. They have to continue on because they have no other choice, right?
Yeah, Sartre is an example. He creates meaning for life by choosing certain courses of action. And in his own life, he chose Marxism, which I found kind of odd, but he
Right.
needed a framework within which to operate and live.
Yeah, Marxism is utterly inconsistent, with saying that life is objectively meaningless, what Sartre said. So, and then to say that someone can create meaning, by being a Marxist.
But he had to, because his life had no meaning, and he was searching for something that would give him meaning without him necessarily believing in God. And Marx seemed to have the right answers. And oddly enough, was written after Karl Marx obviously did his writing after the Enlightenment. So he was one of those giants who still rules people's minds from the grave, just like Charles Darwin.
Right.
And it's sad to say, but
so it just winds up being an exercise in self-delusion.
Self-delusion, exactly. And here's the other thing, if atheism is actually true, and that you have a universe without God, and of course there's objectively meaningless life, no matter how we regard it, but man cannot live consistently within this framework. He has to pretend life has meaning to be happy.
Right.
And this pretension is totally inconsistent with their philosophy.
So that becomes then an argument against atheism.
Exactly.
So another argument then is that without God, since without God life has no value, here's where there are really blatant inconsistencies lie, because it's logically incompatible to hold to this atheistic humanism on one hand and ethics of love and brotherhood on the other. They just don't go together.
Right. And if there is no God, objective right and wrong don't exist. We've already mentioned that. But everything in man cries out against wrongs such as genocides and slaughters and all of the things that happened in the 19th century. So what they have to do is make a blind leap of faith to this upper story to affirm their values anyway.
Right.
But man cannot live with the horror of a world without any value.
No.
And again, he's jumping up into that second story.
To get away.
Well, he has to.
And it doesn't, and that the world is truly horrible, one only has to think of things like the Holocaust and the true brutality of man that's been demonstrated, So without God, then our entire world is an Auschwitz.
Yeah, I listened to William Lane Craig talk about Auschwitz because he actually had a chance to interview a surviving rabbi of Auschwitz who talked about the horrors, just the utter brutality and inhumanity that was exercised during in those camps. And one of the things he said, which was so profound, this Jewish rabbi, survivor of the Holocaust, said that it was almost as if the Ten Commandments were reversed. 1 through 4 have to do with man's relationship with God, and they were totally reversed. Do not love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Do not go to church. Take the Lord's name in vain. I mean, it was all the reversals of everything that we knew.
Yeah, kill, steal.
Yeah, and then 5 through 10 are how you live horizontally with people, your family, and so forth. And it was murder, commit adultery, steal, covet your neighbor's wife, and so forth. It was just a total reversal of everything. And he said that Auschwitz was going to be a microcosm of what this world would eventually become, because without God, you have a complete reversal of the Ten Commandments.
And Nietzsche tried to get around this problem by saying that you have to live beyond good and evil. You have to live as though there is no such thing. It's kind of a Eastern mystical view of life. There's no good or evil. But he himself could not keep that. He had a mentor, Wagner, who was a strident German nationalist and an anti-Semite. And Nietzsche broke with him. He did not think that was morally acceptable. So he himself could not live beyond good and evil. So this is evidence that atheism is false.
Right, and likewise, Sartre also condemned anti-Semitism because it was a doctrine that was only going to lead to the extermination of people, not only their opinion, but also their race. And of course, not of equal value, but it's opposite. It goes beyond personal taste. It's a right thing, it's a wrong thing, and he knew that there was a difference between right and wrong. He struggled during his lifetime to elude these contradictions,
but couldn't. Yeah,
but he couldn't.
That's
exactly.
Right. So without God, all evil acts go unpunished. All good sacrifices go unrewarded. We could go on and on. I don't think we need to spend. We've got maybe 5 minutes left. I don't know that we need to go to all the possible examples we could give of some of the altruistic ways that people have sacrificed themselves to help others, and we automatically know this as a good thing. So, and yet, if God's not there, then it doesn't mean anything. It's the person who is altruistic is almost stupid, right?
So Keith, what is the opposite side of the coin? What about the Christian worldview?
Let's talk about that for a while.
Okay.
Biblical Christianity provides two conditions necessary for a meaningful and valuable and purposeful life. It provides that God exists, but also that immortality. Because even with God, if your life is just a flash in the pan and you have this one life and you cease to exist, then still really how can you say how meaningful can that life have been? If there's no afterlife.
Sure. So if you have God and if you have this promise of eternal life or immortality, with these two items in hand, man can live both consistently and happily.
Right.
And the Bible affirms this.
Right.
Life is ultimately significant. You have knowledge of God, and that's the eternal life, being with God forever.
Mm-hmm. And
this is fulfillment for the human existence and what man was made for in the first place.
Right.
To know God and to worship God.
Exactly.
And that's your first 4 commandments.
And then there's also the issue of moral values, right? Where do they come from? Are moral values the kinds of thing that God just proclaims just arbitrarily, and he made stealing wrong, but he could have just as easily made stealing right? He's some kind, he's like a dictator above morality, and he just decides. That seems kind of inconsistent to the atheist. Or let's flip that around and say, well, maybe God has to obey these rules too, right? God can't lie, God can't steal, because these are ultimate rules of the universe that are even over God. Then God's really not in control, in a sense. It's as if these laws are. But Christianity has a different look at this problem, this conundrum. Christianity says that moral values come from who God is, from his nature, that lying is wrong because it's against God's nature himself to lie. So you have this strong development of moral values that are rooted in the nature of God himself, and his commands are equal to the moral duties that man has.
So we actually have moral choices that, in the long term, give us an eternal significance.
Right.
Because we do eventually have to meet with the Creator for all things done and not done, whether good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the crowns will be given to us accordingly.
Yeah, God is going to hold people accountable for their moral choices. What did they do?
Yeah,
right and wrong.
Right. One of the things that I share with people all the time is that we all go to heaven. The only problem is that not everybody's going to be invited to stay.
That's right. You're going to go to heaven for judgment.
Yes. There are only 2 types of religion. It's the sheep and the goats. The sheep understand it. They hear Jesus' words. They hear him calling. And the goats don't. The goats are not going to be invited.
So Christianity provides also a purpose in life. It provides ultimate meaning, it provides moral values, but it also provides a purpose. And that is that God wants us to be in relationship with him. He is creating creatures who can spend eternity with him in a loving relationship. That is what the purpose of the entire universe is.